Electric vehicles have been an increasingly common and popular choice for customers looking to purchase a new car. However, based on some of the headlines you may read, the average person might not believe it. You've probably heard a lot of EV critics parrot talking points that EV sales have plummeted and that the whole market is crashing. While companies like Tesla have seen some sales slowdowns as of late, the truth behind the situation is a lot more complicated. Today we're going to look into the truth behind the status of the industry to answer one question: are EVs really dying? So let's get into it. To start, let's address the claim that EV sales are collapsing or that the industry is on the verge of failing. While the EV segment hasn't been growing at the same rate that it once did, saying that they are headed towards failure just is not accurate. The truth of the matter is that EV sales are still growing, but definitely at a slower rate than they had in the past. This is not only reasonable, but expected. Electric vehicle growth was huge in its initial waves, and keeping up that extreme rate just wasn't realistic. In Q1 of this year, Kelley Blue Book estimated that Americans had bought 268,909 electric vehicles in total. Their share of new vehicles sold came in at just 7.3%, however, which, although up by 2.6% year over year, was actually a 15.2% decrease from Q4 of 2023. That's not a particularly strong quarter, and it looks even worse when you compare it to the same period in years past. For example, in Q1 of 2023, EV sales were up 46.6% year over year and 15.5% quarter over quarter. In 2022, sales in Q1 went up by 81.2% year over year and by 20.4% quarter over quarter. On the surface, it's easy to see how someone might see that decline and think that this was a disaster for the industry. However, now that EV sales have gotten past their first big growth phase, things will be slower for a little bit, as, quote, segment growth typically slows as volume increases. Tesla, being the largest EV maker in the nation, was the most impacted by this industry slowdown, since they make up the largest part of the industry. Overall, Tesla has been having a slower year with sales, as Q1 marked a 13.3% drop year over year. This same quarter saw Tesla's share of the EV market drop to a low of 51.3% compared to 61.7% last year. Tesla has had such a huge market share for a while because they were not only the best option on the market, but they were one of the few that were actually viable at all for most customers. They were among the first to offer really usable ranges, and their supercharger network was head and shoulders above the competition. They were also scaling their cars and making them truly available. Now, Tesla isn't the only contender around, as other brands have been working hard to bring more competitive models to market. In the last year, 9 different brands have seen EV sales growth, which exceeds 50%. That list includes new and legacy automakers around the world like BMW, Cadillac, Ford, Hyundai, Kia, Lexus, Mercedes, Rivian, and VinFast. However, while those rates are still high, it's not the whole picture. Most of these automakers are still selling limited numbers of units, which makes it easier to see such high growth rates. With that said, many of their sales numbers aren't as small as you may expect. For example, BMW recently overtook Tesla in European EV sales for the month of July. They sold 14,869 cars in the continent, beating out Tesla by a bit more than 300 units. Tesla was on top for a very long time, and while they do still have a considerable lead in many ways, other companies are starting to close that gap. So if so many companies are bringing such great options out for sale, then why is it that the EV market has been plateauing so much as of late? EVs are undoubtedly great transportation options, but they still have some limitations, whether those be real or just perceived, that keep them from mass adoption. Right now, we are at the tail end of what can be considered the early adopter phase, where those with a specific interest in the technology have likely already bought in. Since this is still such a relatively new technology, and gas vehicles are already extremely integrated into society, it will take a bit more work to get others to switch over. To start, electric vehicles are still pretty pricey when compared to their gas-powered counterparts. Many automakers are working on bringing more affordable models to market, but those vehicles haven't really arrived in any major way. When customers have wide access to reliable EVs brand new in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, that will be a huge boon to sales. As it stands right now, the average electric vehicle costs around $10,000 more than an ICE equivalent car. While there are a lot of incentives available to EV customers, that price difference is still a tough pill to swallow for many, especially those who want to shop on the lower end of the price spectrum. As it stands right now, shopping used is one of the few ways that many customers will be able to get a truly affordable electric option, at least until automakers bring theirs to market. Additionally, there is the persistent problem of range anxiety. While the average person's daily drive is well within the range promised by an electric vehicle, many are still hesitant to buy one because of what they perceive as range deficiency. These cars are undoubtedly amazing for short-range trips, but for longer road trips, you are likely going to have to stop and charge. Charging infrastructure has greatly expanded over the years, but it's nowhere near as fast or ubiquitous as the nation's gas stations. That fact gives people a degree of range anxiety, fearing that their car won't be able to get them to where they want to go without a lengthy charging stop. Charging definitely isn't what many make it out to be, but soon this is largely going to be a problem of the past. EV developers are constantly working behind the scenes to develop the latest technology that will make these cars more viable and efficient than ever. For example, new battery tech is under development that could greatly increase battery density, and therefore can lead to better range. Solid-state batteries are a technology that has long been promised by the battery industry, but the huge interest in electric vehicles has prompted more research and development than ever before. The latest word from some of the world's premier battery makers suggests that this tech is closer than ever, and its arrival will bring much in the way of increased range and efficiency. Beyond just larger batteries, engineers are also working on ways to increase charging speeds for those vehicles. One of the biggest innovations in the EV world as of late has been the implementation of 800-volt systems architectures. Traditionally, EVs have been made using architectures that support 400 volts of power running through them. This different system architecture allows for more power to be supplied to the car more efficiently, if you plug in at a suitable charging station. There's a growing list of EVs which come equipped with this technology, including the Cybertruck, Hyundai Ioniq 5, and the Porsche Taycan. When paired with the latest generation of DC fast charging, this architecture can lead to much faster charging speeds. When it comes to charging rollout as well, the industry has done a lot to increase availability of public charging equipment. Tesla has been the undisputed leader in the charging space for a while now, and we are seeing other companies accelerating their own efforts. As Tesla continues expanding their own supercharger network, they are also partnering with many other automakers, who are not only switching to Tesla's NACS connector for easier compatibility, but planning to use Tesla superchargers in the future. Today, Ford and Rivian EVs have access to Tesla superchargers, and more automakers are being added to the list regularly. This means that Tesla supercharging experience will no longer be exclusive to Tesla vehicles, which is both tough for Tesla but also a great thing for the industry as a whole. The private sector isn't the only group making huge investments into the rollout of charging infrastructure across the nation, though. Back in 2022, the US federal government announced their National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or NEVI, designed to rapidly promote charger installations across the nation. The program allocated $5 billion in spending and an additional $2.5 billion in discretionary grants to go towards building upwards of 500,000 chargers by the end of the decade. The program focuses on expanding charger accessibility in rural areas and along freeway corridors. The rollout of federally funded charging stations has been very slow so far, but hopefully this program can pick up pace to hit their goal. Increasing access to charging infrastructure, especially in currently underserved areas, will do a lot to reduce range anxiety for many potential customers and make EVs more reliable in rural areas. Ultimately, there were a lot of factors that have impacted EV sales over the last year. For Tesla in particular, the rate of growth that they had seen over the last few years was predictably unsustainable. That's not a slight against the company at all, but just a simple fact of mathematics. When you are a company producing low volumes, it doesn't take nearly as much to reach those higher percentage point growth rates. It's the same reason that a ton of legacy automakers have been growing rapidly as well, even though in truth, they still don't actually sell that many EVs. For example, say you sold 10,000 EVs one quarter. The next quarter, you sell 15,000. That is a 50% growth rate. You only needed to sell 5,000 more cars in order to see 50% growth. However, if you're scaled up to where you sell 200,000 cars in a quarter, of which Tesla already does double that, that would mean that you would need 100,000 more vehicles sold in the next in order to see 50% growth. So this doesn't take anything away from how impressive what Tesla has done is. In just a few years, they have built the entire EV market up from essentially nothing and turned it into an advanced and exciting segment. Tesla was the first company to prove that electric vehicles were truly viable and prompted the entire industry to take heed. While Tesla's sales have slowed down as of late, the company has been quick to clarify how they see the situation. Rather than being in a slump, as some might describe it, Tesla views themselves as being in between growth waves right now. Their current lineup of vehicles, great as they are, have been on the market for a while, and they recognize that they need to bring new products to market to boost growth. Even with the new Cybertruck being introduced, that is still an expensive vehicle. Tesla is working hard on a number of new products that could grow not just their own business, but revolutionize the entire transportation industry. To illustrate what's going on here a bit more clearly, let's look at the growth in EVs from 2020 to 2021 compared to 2022 to 2023. Between 2020 and 2021, EV sales doubled. They saw a 116% growth rate, which is incredible. However, when we look at 2021 to 2022 sales, the market only grew by 55%. Then from 2022 to 2023, EV sales grew by 29.8%. Still an increase, but far smaller than the years prior. When simply looking at these numbers, it can be easy to think, wow, this whole market is plummeting. Everyone interested bought EVs from 2020 to 2021, and then interest died right after that. Well, with any product, if you sell more the next year, that's considered a good thing. But looking at overall units really paints a different story here. Between 2020 and 2021, EV sales doubled from 3 million to 6.7 million units sold. From 2021 to 2022, that grew to 10 million sold, and then the next year, that grew to 13 million sold. These aren't cumulative numbers. 13 million EVs were sold within that time frame, on top of the 10 sold the prior year, and so on. In fact, every single year is record-breaking for EV sales, and we just saw Q2 of 2024 hit another record high. It's just not record-breaking growth rates, because that compounds to become incredibly difficult. For example, if we wanted to see another 116% EV growth rate for 2024, it would mean that the global auto market would have to not only produce 28 million new EVs within the year, but have 28 million customers ready to buy them. Considering that Tesla held 19.9% of the global EV market share for 2023, and they sold about 1.8 million cars in that year, it would require a legitimate miracle for supply chains, factories, employees, and customers to enable 28 million EVs to be made within the year. That's somewhere we could get in the future, but naturally, things have to get there slowly. It's easy to grow by 100% when you're selling smaller numbers. Making an extra 10,000 cars is one thing. It becomes exponentially more difficult when selling millions more cars and needing to suddenly make millions more. The holy grail for the entire EV industry has, for a while, been a truly affordable model with decent range. The most popular models on the market, like the Model 3 and Y, are a bit more expensive than some of their comparable ICE vehicles. Take the Toyota Corolla, for example. This has consistently been one of the most popular vehicles in the world, and it has a starting MSRP of just $22,050. If you bought this vehicle, you'd probably pay more due to things like dealership fees, but that's an extremely competitive price for what is considered a very reliable, long-lasting vehicle. The cheapest EV on the market right now is the Nissan Leaf, which has its fans but isn't particularly comparable overall. The Leaf starts at $28,140 and only has a range of up to 149 miles at that price, which will likely be much lower in the real world. That range is fine for commuting short distances, but most people will be put off by not having the flexibility of easily going on long trips, especially since it charges slowly. The latest Leaf vehicles are eligible for $3,750 in federal tax incentives, but for most people, that doesn't sweeten the deal enough to consider it. In order to really capture a huge and underserved portion of the market, EV makers will have to start delivering cheaper models with good range. As such, many automakers are currently racing to be the first to bring their truly affordable models to market. Kia's upcoming EV3 is expected to start at $35,000 for 300 miles of range and should be eligible for the federal EV tax credit, bringing the price down to a more reasonable $27,500. The upcoming Jeep Renegade is expected to start around $25,000 when it arrives sometime in 2027. Ford is similarly working on a currently unnamed affordable EV, which they expect to sell starting at $25,000 as well. Pretty much every major automaker is working on electric vehicles that fall into this price category, and when they can come to market, it should attract a lot of customers towards EVs. With that in mind, you may expect that Tesla is working on an affordable vehicle of their own to bring to market. The answer is a bit more complicated than you may think. For years, Tesla was reportedly working on a $25,000 EV that would be built on the same platform as their upcoming Robotaxi, so it would be optimized from the ground up. We'll talk a bit more about the Robotaxi in a minute, but Tesla shifted gears behind the scenes to focus on that autonomous vehicle and seemingly canceled their plans for this more affordable option, at least in a dedicated form. A lot of people were very disappointed to hear that, but it seems like Tesla's plans for affordable options weren't entirely scrapped, just this particular version. Instead, Tesla will be focusing on building new models that are largely based on their existing lineup of vehicles. In their Q2 earnings report, Tesla said plans for new vehicles, including more affordable models, remain on track for start of production in the first half of 2025. These vehicles will utilize aspects of the next generation platform as well as aspects of our current platforms, and will be able to be produced on the same manufacturing lines as our current vehicle lineup. By building these new vehicles on the same lines as their current vehicles, they will save a lot of money, time, and effort, as well as allowing for a quicker production ramp of these new vehicles. The initial expectations were that Tesla was working on a stripped-back Model 3, but the latest rumors out of China suggest that the upcoming Model Y refresh will actually be the first to get these affordable options. For a while now, customers have been patiently awaiting word on the arrival of the refresh of Tesla's best-selling Model Y SUV. That car was highly anticipated since it was expected to bring all of the great features that came previously to the Model 3. In addition to those upgrades, Tesla will also reportedly be delivering 2 additional variants of this car for different market segments. To start, Tesla will likely be producing a larger version of the Model Y with 7 seats. There are also rumors that it could be a 6-seater as well. Tesla does make a 7-seater variant of the Model Y in certain markets, but the back seats are very small and cramped. Expanding the body to make a dedicated 7-seat or 6-seat version would be a much more comfortable and popular option to appeal to more. These options should be popular with customers who want a larger 3-row SUV that will definitely be cheaper than other options like the Model X or Rivian R1S. Initial reports suggest that this vehicle would only be coming to China, but that seems unlikely. The US is one of the biggest markets for large SUVs, and it would definitely sell well if brought here. Beyond this larger option, Tesla is also reportedly working on a smaller, stripped-back version of the Model Y to fill their affordable niche. This car can be built on the same assembly lines as their current Model Y vehicles, but in a simpler form factor to drive down cost. The Model Y is Tesla's most widely produced vehicle, and the production efficiencies that they have implemented have made it the cheapest to make. Rather than upgrading or building completely new assembly lines, they can utilize the investments into efficiency that they've already made to keep costs down. We don't have much word on this vehicle or how much it might cost, but it should prove to be a cheaper and therefore very popular option. A slightly smaller version of the Model Y would definitely be popular. A current lack of affordable pricing is probably the largest thing holding back customers from adopting EVs in a major way. With all of the biggest automakers working on making affordable models, we can expect the market to start its next major growth wave soon. Beyond just selling affordable models, Tesla is working on another groundbreaking product that could revolutionize the entire EV industry. The Robotaxi is their upcoming fully autonomous vehicle that could fundamentally change course for the entire company. This vehicle will be the flagship of the company's self-driving rideshare service, running 24/7 without any human operators. In fact, the car is supposed to have no steering wheel, pedals, or mirrors, since it will be fully autonomous. By removing the need for human drivers, Tesla hopes to drive down the cost per mile driven for all vehicles until it is the most economical way to get around. Tesla has such high hopes for this vehicle that they think the revenue that it generates will someday outpace their vehicle sales. At the same time, Tesla is planning on eventually incorporating all FSD-equipped consumer vehicles into the Robotaxi fleet. Any Tesla owner who chooses to can send their car out onto the road to pick up and drop off customers while making a bit of extra income on the side. Tesla will take some of the profits from these rides, meaning that every Tesla vehicle could be a further source of income for the company. If you are a Tesla owner, you can send your vehicle out at night while you're working or any other times during the day that you don't need a car, and it could become a secondary source of income for you. Some people might decide to buy a Tesla vehicle just to have it work on their behalf. If Tesla can dramatically reduce the cost of ride-sharing with these robotaxis, then that could reshape the way that people get around. If a ride is only a few dollars, then people might grow to rely on this service as their primary way to travel. People might use their personal cars less or even decide that they might not need one anymore. That could simultaneously ease traffic by removing cars from the road and cut down on the emissions that are produced as a result. If handled efficiently, autonomous driving can be safer than human operators, cheaper than owning a car, and ultimately good business for Tesla. However, it's still going to take some time before robotaxis like these can reach the level of ubiquity that Tesla is aiming for. In its current state, FSD is not perfect and does have times where the driver has to take control of the vehicle. Even in instances where the vehicle may not have made a true mistake, many people feel uncomfortable handing control over to a car, especially when it may simply drive differently than they do. On an emotional level, it's going to take some time before many drivers will be fully ready to get into a car that has no physical backup in case of an emergency. There's also the fact that it will take some time before Tesla has built up an adequately sized fleet of these cars to handle transportation on a large scale. These cars have yet to be spotted on the road testing in any capacity, and we are still only seeing modified Model 3 test units training their unique camera setup. When we factor in the regulatory hurdles that Tesla will surely face in rolling out these cars, it will definitely take some time before these vehicles are truly an everyday transportation solution for many people. So while there are a lot of products coming soon that can revitalize the EV industry, these companies do have to stay profitable until then. With that in mind, how long can we expect this relative slowdown to last before something changes? Some experts think that it may be a while before we start to see sales pick up in a major way again. An analyst from the investment firm Morgan Stanley recently released a report stating that they expect this slowdown to last for another 12 to 18 months. They note that while EVs are still on track for another record-breaking sales year, the rampant enthusiasm which drove initial sales has slowed for the time being. They anticipate that between now and 2026, global EV sales will rise from 14 to 17%, 3% less than was estimated a few years ago. On the bright side, however, with the rise in new and affordable models, they anticipate that this slowdown will be followed by a resurgence shortly after. By 2030, they expect that EV sales will make up around 32% of global auto sales, which is impressive, but still 8% lower than previous industry expectations. Initial estimates were heavily swayed by the explosive initial growth of the industry, which was bound to slow down eventually. It is promising to see that EV sales are on track to continue their growth, albeit with a bit of course correction. In essence, Morgan Stanley believes that all of the things that we have talked about in today's video bring back those higher sales rates. More widespread charging infrastructure, lower vehicle costs, and more variety are all expected to increase EV sales over the next few years. Interestingly, one of the other things that Morgan Stanley thinks will boost EV sales and profits is for more Western automakers to partner with China. China has long been seen as an existential threat to the Western auto market, largely due to their high output of extremely cheap EVs. Western automakers did not think that they could compete on those prices, and that led governments across North America and Europe to implement tariffs as high as 100% on Chinese-made EVs. While most analysts have viewed the relationships between automakers in China and the West as antagonistic, some at Morgan Stanley see a more cooperative alternative. They argue that collaborations between legacy automakers and newer EV manufacturers could lead to a renaissance in the industry, and that includes automakers in China. They argue that as it stands right now, dedicated EV manufacturers have significant advantages over legacy automakers in terms of software integration and overall electric vehicle platforms. Legacy automakers have current advantages in overall manufacturing capacity, supply chains, brand recognition, and just general capital. By partnering together, they argue that these companies could produce higher quality EVs in larger quantities and at lower cost. Take, for example, the recent partnership between VW and Rivian. VW recognized that their software capabilities were limited, so they partnered with Rivian to provide the great EV software that will run their upcoming vehicles. It seems like we might see deals like this more often across the West, but could we see automakers here partner with China? Chinese automakers are very good at producing and developing extremely affordable vehicles on a very quick timescale. The affordability of Chinese models is what has fueled their explosive growth, and what has made so many companies panic as a result. Western companies are working on their own affordable models, but that development has been slow. Given current political and economic tensions across the globe, I think international partnerships like this aren't particularly likely, at least not as a widespread phenomenon. Recently, VW also announced a partnership with the Chinese firm XPeng to jointly develop new vehicles, but it seems like those vehicles will exclusively serve the Chinese market. It seems unlikely that anytime soon we are going to see Chinese-developed EVs on American roads in any major capacity, even if they are badged by Western brands. On the other hand, we could see some companies adopt an "if we can't beat them, join them" mentality to approaching foreign competition. There is certainly some credence to the idea of companies building more robust partnerships across the industry. It's very difficult to get a large-scale business like this off the ground and producing profitable vehicles before the money dries up. When a car maker goes bankrupt, that opens up a whole new conversation regarding how their vehicles will be maintained and continue operation once they are out of business. Repairs and replacement parts are naturally becoming harder to come by, but given the incredibly software-reliant nature of many modern EVs, that could throw a huge wrench into their continued operations. So while EVs as a whole are not dying, some companies actually are. For example, one of the many EV startups that made waves within the last few years was the American company Fisker. Fisker drew a lot of attention for their Ocean EV, and they were gearing up to introduce a lineup of new vehicles, including a new and more affordable option. The company had been having financial troubles for a while, as well as quality issues with their existing cars, and unfortunately wasn't able to see those products through to reality. Earlier this year, the company went bankrupt and announced that they would be selling all of their assets, as well as stopping updates to their existing vehicle software. That left thousands of customers in a precarious situation, where they weren't exactly sure how this would impact the functionality of vehicles that were otherwise still very new. Relying on the cloud for their software meant that after the bankruptcy, many owners had trouble locking their cars or even using the air conditioning. This kind of situation isn't extremely common, and you shouldn't take this as a sign to worry about the future functionality of any EV. But for customers of some of the world's smaller EV startups, this is something worth considering. One can say what they will about the competitiveness of the electric options that have come from the West's legacy automakers, but the major players are a bit less likely to go out of business entirely than a small startup. Partnerships between new and established brands could be a great way for these smaller companies to spread the risk around while still offering innovation in the EV space. Fisker had attempted to launch several partnerships during their last few months, with Nissan being a contender, but those all fell through in the end. Overall, if you spend a lot of time looking at traditional media talking about electric vehicles, you may have a slightly inaccurate perception of how the industry is truly going. The growth of EV sales has definitely slowed down since the earliest explosive growth, but that was something that could have been expected. EVs have been a huge game changer for the entire auto industry, but it's important to remember that they are still a relatively new technology. It felt like there was an expectation almost that these cars would come and instantly take over the entire industry, or otherwise completely fail. Instead, the truth is somewhere in the middle. EVs are the future of transportation, but they will still take time to fully mature and reach the point where every person will pick an EV every time. Large automakers have the difficult job of walking the line between keeping up current profits while also juggling their long-term commitment to full electrification. Many people might be disappointed by some of the backpedaling that we've seen from some of the world's major automakers on introducing EVs, but eventually the levee will break on these cars. As the technology continues to grow and improve, more customers will be willing to buy in. Increased demand will drive further sales to the segment, which will prompt automakers to actually commit to the technology. When the day comes, it will be interesting to see if these companies regret having taken electrification less than seriously for so long. When picking an EV is a no-brainer for anyone, most people will probably want to go with the brands that have already worked out the initial kinks of their design. Automakers that neglected their EV options will probably take a while to figure out a path forward. While these companies may backpedal right now because of the losses that they're incurring, you could justify it as valuable experience and investment for their future. This is a good argument for these brands making more in-depth partnerships to both speed up their EV development and to spread out costs. Tesla has asserted itself as the front-runner in the EV market, and while others are looking to catch up, they have really turned themselves into a huge presence. Then there are companies like Lucid and Rivian who make excellent EVs, some of the best in the industry, but scaling effectively and becoming profitable has been difficult for them. If companies like them had the capital and advanced supply chains that the largest automakers have, then that could be a real game changer. It would speed up EV development and could make the cars cheaper to produce via economies of scale and vertical integration. Tesla proved that this was the most effective way to make EVs profitable. They weren't fully profitable for the first time for a full year until 2020, after they had been making cars for over a decade. These things do take time to get going. Either way, despite what some scaremongering articles might say, the EV industry is still growing at a healthy rate. It may take some time for supply and demand to recalibrate back to a faster growth rate, or back to what we were seeing for a long time there, but that isn't at the expense of the entire industry. If you can look at the current situation with clear eyes, then you can see that this temporary slowdown in growth isn't the beginning of the end. The future looks bright for EV technology, and soon I think we'll be able to laugh about the supposed death of electric vehicles. That's all for today, but if you're interested in the best EV deals available right now, you can check out that video linked up here or in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.